Hey everybody. About a month ago, I sat and passed the FE Civil exam. Throughout my preparation, I spent a lot of time on YouTube and on Reddit, reading about other people's experiences and learning from the advice that they had to offer. And I found doing that very beneficial to my preparation. So I thought I would do a little video sort of sharing my experiences, and hopefully some of you can benefit from that as I did. So, just quick outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background since I think that your background should definitely affect the way that you're preparing for the exam. I'll talk a little bit about the exam itself, what I did to prepare for it, and the lessons learned from that. I'll give a brief view of the PPI FE Civil Review Manual, and I'll talk about some exam strategies that I think you should be thinking about when you sit the exam. So, hopefully, you enjoy it. So, a little bit about my background. I'm a Canadian civil engineer. I completed my degree in civil in Canada about 5 years ago. Now, the Canadian system doesn't really use the NC's testing framework to award its licenses, so there wasn't really a need for me to take the exam until I moved to the US earlier this year. So, I didn't take the exam until several years after my undergrad. Now, the exam essentially covers the entirety of your engineering degree. So, given the option, I absolutely recommend taking it as close to your graduation date as possible. I should mention that I did do a master's degree last year, but the master's degree covers higher level subjects, and the FE exam really just covers the fundamentals. So, it didn't help as much as I expected. I work mostly in geotech and underground structures, which definitely helped for part of the exam. So that's something that if you've been out for a while practicing, you bring to the table, and that's definitely a benefit. But it's still only going to cover a relatively small portion of the exam. So if you've been out for a while, it's okay. You just have to give yourself a little bit of extra time to go back and learn some of those subjects that you haven't really used for a while. So, just a little bit about the FE exam. It's now a computer based test, which means it's a lot more flexible as to when you can schedule it. It's 110 questions. You have just over 5 hours to write it, which works out to somewhere around 3 minutes per question. Now, that short duration per question was one of the aspects of the test that was more challenging than I anticipated. So, definitely a heads up on that. You write the test in 2 sessions. The first session is your math, calculus, probability, computational analysis, things that every engineering degree should cover, and things that you might not regularly exercise in practice. The second session is your discipline specific, which in my case was civil. Each part has 55 questions, and you're allowed to take a break in between, which I definitely recommend because when you're writing a test for over 5 hours, it's very beneficial to have just a quick break where you can recharge your mind. The only catch is that as soon as you decide to take this break, you can no longer revisit the questions of the first session. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, now for the important part. First thing you need to do is go to the NC's website and download the specifications for the exam that you're writing. Basically, this is a document that tells you exactly what's on the exam and how much each section is weighted, which is exactly how you should be allocating your study efforts. Second, you need to decide when to take it. I gave myself 3 weeks while working full time. I don't recommend only giving yourself 3 weeks. It's just not enough time to cover all the subject material, although I was able to pass just on that. You should probably double or even triple that depending on how long you've been out of school. Um, Third, make sure you have an approved calculator and start using it immediately. There's just not enough time during the exams to actually figure out how to use a lot of its functions. And a lot of the stats and linear algebra questions you can solve directly on your calculator to save yourself a ton of time. Fourth, you need to get yourself some study materials. I opted to get the PPI Civil Review Manual, and I read a lot of criticism online about how this doesn't necessarily cover everything you need to know on the exam, and it spends a lot of time covering material that you don't need to know for the exam. And although I agree with that to an extent, I think every good engineer should understand the limitations of the tools they're using, and considering how many topics are covered on the exam and how concisely this goes over everything, I think this as a reference is just fine, and I was able to pass by pretty much only using this. I also got the PPI practice problems, and since I only gave myself 3 weeks, I didn't really get a chance to dive too deeply in here. But from what I did see, the questions are slightly harder than what I saw on the exam. Um, so, I mean, between these two, I think that's plenty for what you actually need to pass. And my final piece of advice in preparation is spend maybe a little extra time on math, since a lot of those principles extend to pretty much every other subject on the exam. So one of the big takeaways for me after writing the FE was how important it was to actually prepare to write the exam and not just learning the material. I think this is especially important if it's been a while since your last exam, because these aren't necessarily skills that you exercise regularly in practice. Now, everybody has their own test taking strategies, but here are some things that I think would have been helpful to me had I known them before writing the exam. My big mistake was trying to solve every problem in order, and when I didn't know how to solve them, I would just figure it out on the spot. Yeah, the problems aren't all that difficult, but it's super easy to spend too much time on each problem. You only have about 3 minutes to solve each one, so managing your time is essential. If you don't immediately know how to solve a problem, just skip it. You can always flag these and come back to them later. It's far more important to get all the easy questions on your first pass through than to miss out on those easy points because you ran out of time. Another thing I noticed is that the general section was generally easier than the discipline specific section. And since both sections are weighted evenly, I think if you think that you'll have extra time, I would probably put those towards the general section, since you're more likely to get the harder questions there correct than the harder questions in the discipline specific one. That's just my opinion though. My final piece of advice is to remember that you only really need 55 to 65% to pass. And even if you blindly guess every single question, you'll probably get 25% of them right, which is basically halfway there. And it's multiple choice, and you can usually eliminate one or two obviously wrong answers. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, and don't hesitate to guess where appropriate. Just when guessing, make sure you do it in a way that maximizes the probability of you getting it correct. Now, I have a lot more thoughts on this, but I want to keep the video short and concise. So just remember that the exam is not overly difficult, and they're not trying to trick you. They just want to make sure that you understand the fundamental principles of engineering before they consider giving you a license. I really hope this was at least helpful to some of you, and I wish all of you the best of luck. And if you do end up writing it, I encourage you to share your experiences in the comments below. I know I enjoy reading them, and I know the community at large benefits from a larger conversation around the topic. So thanks a lot for watching, and good luck.